in the Kosovo Women's Network. Today, our webinar is entitled Ensuring Equality, Gender Responsive Public Finance Management, and the Roles of Civil Society. The aim of our virtual gathering is to discuss public expenditure and financial accountability, known as PEFA, specifically the supplementary framework for assessing gender responsive public financial management, and the role that civil society can have in enhancing the application of this methodology in the Western Balkans and the Republic of Moldova. So I'd like to begin today by welcoming and introducing our fantastic lineup of speakers. First, we will hear from 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗲𝗿, who is Senior Public Sector Specialist at the PEFA Secretariat. We welcome you. She will be presenting on the PEFA Supplementary Framework for Assessing Gender Responsive Public Financial Management and its set of 9 indicators. She also will speak on the application of the PEFA Supplementary Framework, lessons learned, and her perspective on civil society's role in using this framework. Next, we will hear from Maja Bosnic. Welcome, Maja. She is the Business Development Director at NIRAS. She has experience applying the PEFA Supplementary Gender Framework in the Ukraine and Indonesia. Drawing from her experience, she will talk about the entry points for using the PEFA framework as a platform for reforming and engendering the Western Balkans and Moldova's public finance management systems. And finally, we will hear from Mary Collins from the European Women's Lobby. We'll welcome you, Mary. She will speak about the possible watchdog roles that civil society can play using the PEFA Gender Supplementary Framework, and what adaptations may be needed for civil society to use it in monitoring. After the speakers, we will have a 10-minute break to think and ponder, and we will come back together to ask questions and have a discussion. So if you have any questions for the speakers while they're presenting, please do write them down so that you can ask them later, or feel free to write them in the chat. We will try to come back to everyone in the order that the questions are raised and have a nice discussion. I have seen the participants list, and I know that we have among us today a very diverse array of participants, including activists, feminists, government officials, academics, and representatives of international organizations. We welcome all of you and thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to thank 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗿𝗲𝗄 from the Gender Alliance in Albania and Maria Stojkovic from Gender Knowledge Hub in Serbia, as they will be taking notes and will produce a brief report summarizing our shared findings and recommendations from the day. I would also like to thank the translators, apologize that I'm probably talking too fast, and thank you all for your work in making this discussion available to many different people in different languages. So I'd like to start off with a very short introduction. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability Program, which we will call PEFA, was initiated in 2001 by 7 international development partners and has since grown. These include the European Commission, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the governments of France, Luxembourg, Norway, the Slovak Republic, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. PEFA began as a means to harmonize assessments of public finance management across partner organizations. It subsequently established a standard methodology for public finance management diagnostic assessments, which we call the PEFA framework. Since 2001, PEFA has become acknowledged standard for public finance management assessments around the world. The PEFA program provides a framework for assessing and reporting on the strengths and the weaknesses of public finance management, or PFM. It uses quantitative indicators to measure performance and is designed to provide a snapshot of public finance management performance at specific points in time, using a methodology that can be replicated in different assessments, giving a summary of change over time. The PEFA Supplementary Framework for Assessing Gender Responsive Public Financial Management was adopted later on. And I'm not going to steal the floor from 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗲𝗿, who will speak about this in just a few minutes and explain all of it in details. I just want to make one last final comment before I hand over the floor. As many of us know, gender responsive budgeting is important for transparency in public finances, for accountability, and most importantly, for using public finance to contribute to gender equality. Indeed, it is also recognized as among the important indicators in the Sustainable Development Goals, and many of our countries have committed to furthering gender responsive budgeting. It's in this context that we, as the Gender Budget Watchdog Network, seek to support our governments in institutionalizing gender responsive budgeting. We see the PEFA Supplementary Framework as a useful tool for assessing gender responsive public financial management and the extent to which our countries are institutionalizing gender budgeting. It can support us to identify how well our countries are doing in establishing these internationally agreed practices. And it can show us areas in need of further support. It also can enable comparisons across countries over time and within countries. This is why we have organized this discussion today, to familiarize more actors in our region with this important framework and to discuss opportunities by which civil society can become more involved in using the PEFA gender framework to monitor progress in our countries. So I would now like to invite 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗲𝗿. She is Senior Public Sector Specialist at the PEFA Secretariat, housed in the World Bank in Washington, D.C. She works on PEFA's Future Outlook, leads on the PEFA Gender Module, and co-leads its research. As a Finnish national, 𝗕𝗂 has 2 decades of strategic management and operational experience on public sector and economic governance, anti-corruption, and public finance management. She's worked in Afghanistan, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, the UK, the US, and South Africa. So 𝗕𝗂 will be presenting on the PEFA Supplementary Framework for Assessing Gender Responsive Public Finance Management and its 9 indicators, the application of this framework, lessons learned, and what her views are on the role of civil society. 𝗕𝗂, I give the floor to you.
Nicole, thank you so much for that introduction. That's really, really kind. And good afternoon, everybody. I will share my screen and have a few slides that I will talk to. And hopefully you can see that. Let me just do that right away. There we are. And there we are. Hopefully you can see that well.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Fantastic. So let me just talk through what the PEFA Supplementary Framework for Assessing Gender Responsive Public Financial Management is. Now, it is a long title, so we would just like to call PEFA Gender. As Nicole very kindly introduced, so my name is Raappana and I work at the PEFA Secretariat. Before I go to the PEFA Gender Framework, I normally like to start saying a few words what gender responsive public financial management is. I know we have many different partners and stakeholders attending today, which is fantastic. And it is actually quite often when we present on PEFA Gender Framework, people actually ask, what do we mean by gender responsive public financial management or budgeting, either way? And how we would like to describe it is that it is good budgeting as a basic principle. But what it means is that it is a very important tool for us to make sure that the gender equality objectives and priorities in countries are delivered effectively. And as Nicole said, that there is transparency and accountability for those delivery of those priorities and objectives. But it's also about really taking the time and the resources and capacity to understand how public financial management system, how we spend public finances can have different impacts on women and men, as well as other groups of people in countries that we don't necessarily see if we don't take time to understand it. But I also often like to show this slide just to say also what gender BFM is not about. It is only a tool to deliver gender equality objectives. So when you use gender PEFA tool, but also when you do gender responsive public finance management, it's really important to understand what the gender equality priorities are in different countries. What the BFM system, what is the role that the BFM system plays in that country? Because obviously in different countries, they are very different. And gender BFM, spending and taxation, both of them are important tools, but they are only one lever. And it's what we've learned by using PEFA gender is really important also to understand what the other levers like regulation, political and moral leadership in that country, as whether it's a government or whether it's legislature, whether it's CSOs like you, what are the roles that different partners play? So why then PEFA gender? Nicole has very kindly explained already, for those of you who are not aware what PEFA is. We established and developed PEFA gender framework to support the main PEFA framework. In the same way as PEFA overall, PEFA core tool, to help governments and different partners in different countries to monitor and identify where they're doing well on gender BFM and where they can improve. But the important point about PEFA gender is that it's not to score countries or their BFM systems. The important part, as we see, and our feedback from our stakeholders says that PEFA gender is really important actually to raise awareness of the role that gender BFM plays in advancing gender equality, as well as obviously other policy objectives, and really enable that dialogue between different partners, whether it's government, legislature, and CSOs, media, other partners, around indicators that are quite clear and are standardized across countries and that are based on what the good practice around the world is. So it's in a way, it's a credible way of saying, okay, where are we doing well? Where can we do better? And what is the practice around the world we can refer to? And that's why I agreed to Nicole in her introduction, what I also see the role of CSOs using this tool as a way of having a dialogue, look at practice around the world and where particular countries were in that context. So PEFA gender has a 9 set of indicators. As I said, is a supplementary framework to the main PEFA framework, and often we recommend that these two assessments are done together. But PEFA gender can also be done alone. And PEFA gender, in the same way as PEFA, has 9 quantifiable indicators and then dimensions within those that are specifically important when you implement gender equality policies through the budget system. And then they're scored. And since we don't have too much time today, I'm not going into very, very detailed technical aspects of these, but I'm very happy to give you guidance where you can find more information and also answer any questions. But I will nevertheless talk you through some of the key things that we think that countries and partners should look for when they look at the BFM systems. And one of the most important principles that we in PEFA believe, and I'm very much different BFM and gender BFM experts around the world, is that it's important that you have a consistent approach across the budget cycle. For example, we see often that budget documentation has a lot of good plans and targets for example, service delivery that affects women. But if that is not implemented effectively through the budget cycle, and if there's no accountability for results, then it doesn't meet its objectives clearly. So we think that looking at this issue around the budget cycle is very important. So just a few basic principles of the kind of things that we're looking for. First of all, we start at the beginning of the budget cycle when the policy budget is prepared. Is there ex ante assessment of those budget policy proposals, particularly the new proposals, whether it's taxation, whether it's expenditure? What are the impacts of those policies on women and gender equality? And it can also include obviously subgroups of these categories. Also, we look at public investment management projects in particular. For example, big infrastructure projects, big projects are proposed. What are the gender impacts of those? Then there's a budget circular, of course, that is sent to finance ministry, to line ministries. Is there clear guidance and requirements for line ministries, how they need to include gender equality issues in their budget proposals? And that is really important in the sense that there's a central direction of what are the gender equality policies in our country and how you should implement that through the budget. When then budget documentation that goes for approval to the legislature, does it have information on gender equality? Particularly, does it have performance information and service delivery that is sex desegregated by genders? And then importantly, does the legislative scrutiny of that budget proposal include and consider gender equity impacts, whether again is expenditure and revenue, and whether it's policies overall on particular programs? I will talk about that a bit in a minute, because that's really important, the legislative scrutiny side of things. But then going through the budget cycle, going to budget execution, actually implementation of budget, is there tracking of expenditure on those agenda related policies or programs? Yes?
Sorry to interrupt you, but there is a request to have a full screen of your presentation, not this mirrored screen that we see. Is it possible?
Oh. Yes, I think, sorry, excuse me. I thought that it is full. Let me see again. I can see it's full on mine. Let me see. Let me try again. Apologies for that.
Yeah, it could be if you are having two screens in front of you that is creating a bit of confusion.
Okay, let me just try again and take it out. And apologies for that. Sometimes it does that exactly when you have two screens. All right. Right. And let me, oh God, my goodness me. Okay. Okay. All right, apologies. Let me just, now it seems to be doing something funny. Apologies, I will fix this quickly. Okay, that may be easier. All right.
If we're not able to do it, I think you should go on, since we're going to send all the presentations to all the participants today. You can share it as it was shared. We just see the next slide that is coming as well. So afterwards, we are going to share everything. They can listen.
Okay, all right.
To.
I don't understand. It doesn't seem to be wanting to do that for some reason. So let me see if I can. Why it's not doing that?
That's perfect. Just press that one where the mouse is positioned and we are okay. Great. No, still.
Yeah, it's some apologies. For some reason, it's not wanting to do that. Let me. Is that better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Apologies for that. let me continue now, and hopefully you can all see it. And apologies for that. Sometimes with this, you think that it's all sorted, and then it doesn't do what you want to do. But apologies. Let me continue briefly on this slide, just to go through the last few examples of the kind of things that PEFA framework is looking at, and hopefully you can all see well. So on the budget execution, what we're looking for is that then the gender related expenditures and revenues are tracked also during budget execution. Particularly what we are looking here is the service delivery that is disintegrated based on gender. Then again, accounting and reporting, what we are looking for is annual reports, and they can be many different things in different countries, but that you have that information on gender equality programs, as well as other important factors if they are included in the budget. For example, the overall picture of gender equality policies and priorities of the country and how they implement it. And then finally, and this is what's really important, and I would want to stress to you, is that external scrutiny and audit is really important, that the legislature doesn't only look at these aspects when it approves the budget, but when also the legislature and the relevant committees scrutinize implementation of that budget at the end of the fiscal year, that then the legislature would look at what have the results been, how those policies related to gender have been implemented, and what are actually the big impacts on gender equality. From our experience, this is the part that overall in PEFA and public financial management has been the weakest aspects over the last few decades, but also we see the same on gender, is that this external accountability and scrutiny side, whether it's audits or parliament scrutiny, is still very weak. And that's where I also believe that CSOs engagement around these issues, whether it's using the PEFA gender or other tools, to really engage not only the government but also legislature to make sure that these issues are of focus and they are monitored, would be really, really helpful. Very briefly, the lessons we have learned so far is that, as I said earlier, country context matters, and that is important matter when we use the PEFA gender tool to understand what the good practices are, what could we do more, is that, as I said, it's important to know what in that country is important for gender equality, but also what role BFM system plays in that country, because obviously priorities are different, but also BFM systems are different. So PEFA tool is a guide, but we really encourage people and stakeholders using it to really think about how it fits in the country, and how you understand the indicators and dimensions that we look at, and what could they mean in different countries is not the same. Ownership is obviously important, that government, but also society more broadly, including the CSOs in different countries, really own this agenda and really prioritize making a difference on it. And really also making part of the day-to-day work of different agencies, so that it becomes a part of normal work rather than something separately. And as I said, it's important to look at these different aspects across the budget cycle. Different countries do this BFM, gender responsive BFM very differently. But what we do think is, as I said, important that it's done through the budget cycle. And what we know from our experience is that not many countries do this across the budget cycle. We've used PEFA gender in different kinds of contexts and countries, and that's clear that no country yet is a very high level of implementation of gender BFM, and that's, I think, fair to acknowledge. We also realize that there are still capacity development, again, around the world to really understand how the different tools of gender BFM can be done in different contexts. But that also means, this is sort of technical side of the work, and that also means that you need BFM skills, but you also very much need gender equality skills to understand how you can do this effectively. And it is a technical issue, it is a capacity issue, but it's also an issue of bringing different partners together, convince BFM partners and that this is important, this matters, and how to do that. Very briefly, then I'll show a map where we currently have PEFA genders done around the world. PEFA gender was only launched officially in a couple of years ago, so it's relatively new, but we have reports done around the world in all regions now. We also have different income levels doing PEFA gender, like Norway, Rwanda is doing it, but also in your region, as you can tell. But just to note that this map does not cover all countries that are planning to do PEFA gender or have done it, because PEFA gender, like PEFA, is a public good. You can take it from our website, use it as you wish, whether you're government or CSO for your own purposes. You don't have to get an agreement from PEFA or anyone else to use it. If you want PEFA Secretariat involvement, and if you want us to quality assure it and give you a PEFA check, then we want to be involved and should be involved, but it is a public tool. So anyone, there's much more PEFA gender has been done that is on this map. And I think that's important also to note that it is everyone free to use. Then very briefly before I finish, a few country examples of how PEFA gender has been used. First, Fiji. Fiji has used PEFA gender where they engagement and knowledge of PEFA, PEFA gender, but also PEFA gender responsive BFM was very low. They started looking at what they could do to strengthen gender BFM across their budget cycle and BFM systems. And they really started quite from early base in the Ministry of Economy to say, what kind of things we can actually do to understand different impacts of the spending we already have to change how we do and implement projects so that it would have a better impact on gender equality. And they are now using PEFA gender to starting pilots in different ministries. I think it's 8 at the moment, and they're slowly Cabinet has now approved planning to use it across all the line ministries. And interesting thing about Fiji is that that's one of the only countries we've found where legislature is actually really engaging in the process, and they're working with UNDP to actually give guidance to legislature how they can really understand gender BFM in their work and how they can be part of the scrutiny process. Quickly, another example from Indonesia, which is a very different example. Indonesia has been doing gender BFM for a while, and they've made really, really good progress, and they have a lot of successes that they can talk about. But even then, PEFA gender was useful for them because they actually are seeing how they can improve gender BFM across and their strategy and roadmap across sort of the government and the public sector. What they realize is that they might be really good at understanding what gender BFM is at the in the Ministry of Finance, at the center of government, but that really they have to have more guidance and more capacity across the system for people to be able to implement it effectively. Particularly, a key issue is often that how do you collect, understand, and use sex desegregated data to design your policies and monitor your policies, which is a common issue in many countries. So that's I wanted to say, just to sort of note that the guidance, the supplementary frameworks on our website, that gives you much more detail what the PEFA agenda looks like, but also it gives you examples of different countries who are doing and implementing gender responsive PFM around the world. And we have also a website that is dedicated to PEFA Gen that you can refer to for more information. And also, of course, you're always welcome to email us at services@pefa.org to ask any questions. Just finally to say that obviously PEFA traditionally works with governments a lot and developing partners to use PEFA and PEFA Gender to assess PFM systems. But what we are really keen, particularly in the context that I talked about, the fact that we notice that the transparency, accountability, that's such an important part of the PFM cycle, it is weakest also in the PEFA agenda, that we are really keen to engage with legislatures and CSOs more to see how PEFA agenda could be used, but how also we can help in terms of understanding what it says and how it could be used in terms of, as I said, perhaps monitoring how governments are doing, but also having that dialogue and awareness raising why these issues matter and how they can be looked differently in different countries. I'll leave it there, and again, apologies for the slight mishap. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia, and thank you so much for taking the time to share with us. This has been really interesting. Some key thoughts to take away. Anyway, for me, I like the beginning. Gender budgeting is good budgeting. It enhances the accountability and transparency, as you've said. And the PEFA Gender helps raise awareness of how public finance management can contribute to gender equality. It's good for all of us to know that it is a publicly available tool that we can use with these standardized indicators and best practices used in the world. And for us all to bear in mind how important context is. Who is in our countries? What are their roles? What is the ownership? And how important ownership is for moving it forward. So I know there have been some questions if this presentation will be shared. Yes, it will. We will be sharing it afterward to all the participants, and we'll be sharing this toolkit and the links that have been shared as well, so we can all take more time to peruse the PEFA Gender framework and see how we can follow up on some of these best practices in our countries. So now we're going to move along to speak and hear from Maja Bosnic, who is the Business Development Director from NIRAS. She has over 15 years experience in international development projects in public finance management, in gender responsive budgeting. She is an economist specialized in PFM and has been working with a number of international finance institutions, including the IMF, World Bank, and she has most recently worked with the World Bank in developing new tools to ensure gender equality is taken up in public finance management processes, such as PEFA Gender. She's been working with the IMF on developing and implementing many training programs globally, and she was the team leader of a 7-year gender budgeting in Ukraine project funded by SIDA, which has had the main objective to support the Ministry of Finance in Ukraine in including gender aspects in financial and budget policies and programs. So, drawing from her experience, I'd like to invite Maja to share with us entry points for using the PEFA framework as a platform for reforming and engendering the Western Balkan and Moldova's public finance management systems. Maja?
Thank you very much, Nicole. Well, before I share my screen and waiting for a disaster to happen, can you hear me?
I think you're muted, sorry.
No, I'm not.
No, she's good. We can hear her.
We can hear you.
It must be my sound. Apologies.
Oh God, I was thinking, can something else go wrong? So first, I want to apologize for the light. Despite working online for 2 years, I never managed to get it really right. So this is what we are working with. That's one. But secondly, and I don't want to take up the time, I know I have 20 minutes and I will stick to them, I promise. But just to say, I'm really, really happy. And I know that we all say that at the beginning of the trainings and when our time comes, but I really am truly, truly happy to be invited by the network, because I've been following your work and I'm really, really impressed by this gender budgeting watchdog network and all the good materials that you are producing and all the good events that you are sharing, and I'm really, really happy to be here. So that's one thing. The second thing is I tend to speak very fast. I can speak in one of the languages of translation, but unfortunately not all of them. So, so I will count on translators perhaps writing in the chat, Maja, please slow down. And now the worst comes, and that is me trying to share my screen and doing it right. Okay, let's see. Can you see my screen? Wonderful.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So just to say, my presentation today would take us, as you, Nicole, already introduced. So my idea and your request was that I reflect on the work with PEFA gender in Ukraine and Indonesia, and draw some maybe lessons learned or maybe conclusions as to why and how would it be important to apply it in the context of Moldova and Western Balkan countries. So I will try to do exactly that, and I will be also very mindful not to overshare the details of both of the countries because I was cooperating with both of them on gender budgeting. So I will minimize the overall picture and then focus on really the learnings from applying PEFA. So this is, oh God, yes, they are moving. Okay, good. So this is what I'm going to be talking about, a bit on Ukraine. I need to give a context on the GRB work so that you can understand what has been captured by PEFA gender.
Maja?
Yes?
Sorry for interrupting. Could you do like a slideshow?
Sure, I can. Sure, I can. Yes, but my slide.
We can see the full screen.
I know exactly. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, then I will talk a bit about Indonesia, even though Tia has nicely already depicted the situation in Indonesia and the follow-up to PEFA findings. I will just elaborate a bit more on that, and then we can together, and especially in a discussion, we can reflect on the lessons learned there. Okay, nice visual. I am always starting with this slide because I thought that it's very illustrative of the times where we started GRB project in Ukraine. And I'm really sad to say that while we are talking, we again have a major crisis in Ukraine, and we are in touch with our colleagues, and I do hope that it will not continue. However, I start with this slide to say that this was exactly the time when we were starting with gender budgeting. And the thing I usually say, it's because the government of Ukraine, and especially Ministry of Finance of Ukraine, wanted to analyze their budget programs in depth, including from gender perspective. So this was kind of drive behind the gender budgeting project in Ukraine, which is important to highlight because this is, again, project that was funded by the Swedish government, and it at time was and still is one of the largest bilateral projects on gender budgeting. Started in 2014, and we just completed our final report, so it has been completed in 2020. But what is most important is that our main counterpart was Ministry of Finance of Ukraine, and the main objective of the project was to increase effectiveness and efficiency in budget allocations, taking into account using these needs of women and men. And what Tia was saying, gender budgeting is good budgeting, is something that we were sticking, and when I say us, I mean the GRB community. Gender budgeting is good budgeting. I always want to say gender budgeting is in fact better budgeting, and it's better in a context of understanding the performance better. So this would be my advocacy towards working more with gender budgeting. And this is,
sorry, just a bit slowly, please. The translation.
Yes, I will do that. Oh my God. Okay.
Sorry.
I can do that. On the slide in front of you, you can just see Ukraine, and I will not talk into details on this slide, but why I put it here is to illustrate to you, colleagues from civil society organizations and maybe government, we are having some music, now not, because we have been, so the whole concept of the work on gender budgeting in Ukraine was very much focused on gender analysis of budget programs. So this was ex post gender analysis of budget programs in all the sectors you can imagine, from infrastructure to health, to education, to youth and sports. So there is a wealth of analysis that has been done by the officers of Ukraine, financial officers and others. And the role of civil society was also very prominent, because we would either have members of civil society organizations within these working groups, or we would have them involved at a different level in disbursement of information and then advocacy towards changing the policies. I can talk about that more. And maybe just to tell you, because in the heart of this concept was gender analysis of budget programs, primarily ex post, towards the end of the project, almost all budget programs at the local level were analyzed from gender perspective. And I mean, I'm trying to highlight this wealth of learning coming from analysis of gender blind budget programs. And I would normally say gender neutral, but they were, of course, completely blind. And as such, they were quite discriminatory. In fact, all of them had gender gaps. So this is very important. And through the time, these budget programs were improved in different ways. Of course, my dream would be that all of them were then improved and that all the gender gaps were closed. That's not the case, but a lot of them have been improved and the gender gaps within the programs have been closed. And what is also important is that Ministry of Finance issued methodological recommendations for all ministries and agencies, so all key spending units, to work with gender budgeting. So how did that, and now I will just go into, this is in a nutshell, the way that we were working in Ukraine and the way the Ministry of Finance was approaching gender budgeting as a public finance management tool, which is something that we can talk about, the pluses and minuses of that. And I know Nicole also can be a very, very informed participant in that discussion. However, PEFA gender was done in 2019, and which is unfortunate. I wish it was done towards the end of 2020 when also the project was completed, but nevertheless, it was a very, very useful exercise. And I will tell you why. I mean, you will remember that Tia took us through 9 indicators throughout our budget cycle, right? And now you are looking at these results and you might be thinking, okay, you know, you are working in Ukraine for 7 years. It's a big, you already said it's the biggest project globally, and yet you have most of the Ds and you have 1 B, and shouldn't you have all A's when you are working for so many years in one country? And to answer to your question, and I think this is very important question because it's bringing us to the essence of this diagnostic tool. And so I want to answer to my own question here and to say that, first of all, it would have been very, very good that this assessment, PEFA gender existed when we started working with the project, because it would point us and the Ministry of Finance primarily, it would be such a good advocacy tool to tell the Ministry of Finance, yes, please, but look at public investment management. This is the standard. We should work with public investment management. So this is, I'm already going into lessons learned for you here. This is the advocacy tool that you go with your PEFA that is really, really highly recognized by the ministries of finance and say, yes, we are talking about gender responsive budgeting because of gender equality objectives that are very valuable in its heart, but we are also talking because this is a very good PFM practice. And therefore, this is what we can do when we are talking about gender impact of policy proposals. Just to say, these are the results, and also to highlight, even with these results, and I already told you there was a meaningful change when it comes to the way budget officers are working with gender equality, so gender responsive budgeting. And I would also say, if these 3 indicators continue to be the focus of the work on gender responsive budgeting, we will see more and more results that will trickle down to other indicators. And also they may even know, we may even don't have to work with all of the indicators in parallel, with all of these areas in parallel, in order to have meaningful results. That would be, I don't know, Tia, if you agree with me, but that would be my 5 cents. So in principle, what we were only disappointed that was not captured by the PEFA assessment was this huge amount of gender analysis that was behind. And why wasn't it captured? This is a trick question, but if maybe in the first presentation you really were super attentive and listening on performance information, maybe you would already have that understanding. Indicator 8. So because here we are seeing evaluation of gender impact of service delivery. That is exactly what we were doing, but we were doing it internally, not externally. And by the definition in this framework, it should be the body that is outside the government, kind of. Anyway, I am moving. Can somebody just let me know? I have 10 more minutes, do I?
A bit less, but
okay,
yes.
I have 2 more minutes to just, okay, doesn't matter. So 5 more minutes. So it would be helpful. The first learning is that it would be helpful to have PEFA assessment when we were designing the project, because we would have because our advocacy towards the partners was very hard. So if we had an instrument like PEFA gender tool, it would have helped. That is one thing. And then in-depth analysis was not captured. I have already told that, and that is maybe something to work also with Secretariat to see how can we make sure to capture it or work with that. And then work on local level was not captured, and that was the huge amount of work because PEFA is done at the state level unless it's really intentionally made for the local level. Indonesia, just to say a few words, because Tia already said, Indonesia is a whole other context because it's the country that takes pride into working with gender budgeting for many years. And they are focusing their work on 3 things. One is gender analysis, in which they are basically producing gender budget statements. And from these gender budget statements, they are tracking the expenditures that are then gender responsive, right? And you can tell that this approach is reflected in the PEFA assessment. So we have these budget call circular, budget documentation, and tracking budget expenditure. But the problem here was that when we did PEFA assessment, we realized that even if this would be A, and it was like almost A, this tracking of budget expenditures, it would still not be meaningful enough. Why? Because the level of quality of gender analysis was not captured. And this was then reflected in the narrative. So this is to say, and I will now go back to the faster maybe conclusions, not to go into the concrete opportunities for improvement, because Tia covered that as well. The main thing here was that it is important to have a very strong narrative when we are doing PEFA GRB assessments. I would say that because the narrative is giving us the flavor and the context of gender budgeting work that has been done. I'm on my last slide. This will last only 1 minute. So my overall learnings and of my colleagues that were working on these assessments and also to some extent developing the tool is, first, this is definitely very strong framework for assessment of GRB work within public finance management interventions. Gender budgeting work goes beyond public finance management interventions. So this is also very important for the narrative part of the report. Of course, this is diagnostic tool. It's just a picture, like when we are taking a photo. So the depth needs to be reflected in the narrative. Key is to send the message, I think, that not all indicators will be high, because I understand that there are countries that are scared to engage with gender budgeting, PEFA, because they're thinking, oh, we did so little work. Oh my God, we will get all these. And it's not a competition on A's. I think none of the PEFAs are, right? That is the main message. But it's really important to say this is just the baseline. This is giving us a tool to advocate for and to understand entry points for gender budgeting. Roadmap to follow is a really good step. And that is a very good step after PEFA as well. And that is ideally used for developing very concrete plan. I would advocate for including gender responsive procurement. Again, I know it was part of original framework, but it would be good to rethink how to include gender responsive procurement. And of course, as Tia already said, it's nice that it is, I think it would be great that it's always kind of combined, even though it's voluntary, with PEFA assessment, because it would give it a little bit more strength, I would say, or maybe it would be taken more seriously. Okay, I am done here. I am really open to all of your questions. I have Indonesia in the background. I had Maidan there. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maja, for sharing your experience with us, a lot of experience, and raising a lot of questions and good points for thought and consideration when we come to the discussion a bit later on. So our new advocacy motto is gender budgeting is better budgeting. And as Maja has shared with us, PEFA is a good diagnostic tool. It tells us where a country is in a given time, focusing mostly on the public finance management side of things. And it's okay if our countries get all D's in the beginning on their report card, because this tells us where the problems are. And it gives us a baseline. And it enables us to know where we should advocate and to whom we should advocate and what kind of goals we can set for our programming and advocacy work. And thanks for sharing some key roles for civil society is advocacy, using this tool to advocate for what our countries can do, participating in working groups, sharing information, but then also bearing in mind the limitations of PEFA, perhaps at the moment, that it does only look at public finance, that GRB is much broader, and that we can consider maybe new ideas there, Tia, she's sharing for how it can look at other aspects like procurement. So we'll leave these for thoughts for our discussion. We want to be kind and mindful of our translators who keep up with people like me who talk too fast and take a short break. Also, maybe you want to let all of this sink in, digest, formulate your questions, grab a cup of coffee. So we are going to have a break until 4:10, when we will come back and have the opportunity to hear from Mary Collins from the European Women's Lobby. So have a nice short break and see you in 10 minutes.
Thank you, Nicole. For everyone that has some questions, I saw some raising hands. Please keep them for later on. Once we finish with all the discussions, with all the speakers, then we'll have a short discussion. Thank you. We have a short break for 10 minutes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you had a nice short break. So now, before we continue, I would just take one moment to really thank the Austrian Development Agency and the Swedish International Development Agency, who are two of our network's supporters and enable us to do the work that we do. We're grateful to the taxpayers in your countries who are supporting us to further gender budgeting in our own countries, and we really appreciate this support. So I would like to now turn to introducing Mary Collins. She is Senior Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at the European Women's Lobby, where she has been working for many years. She works mainly on socioeconomic issues relating to women's economic independence, including gender pay, pension, poverty gaps, work-life balance, and EU 2020 strategy and European semester from a gender perspective. Currently, she's coordinating a working group for feminist economic model, which published the Purple Pact. Mary has 25 years of professional experience in policy development, capacity building, representation, campaigning, and advocacy. She's an expert in gender and socioeconomic issues focusing on Europe, and she has experience in legislative and policy processes at the EU level in women's rights, gender equality, social and labor market policies. So I would like to invite you to share with us your experience from the European Women's Lobby related to gender budgeting and your thoughts on the opportunities for women's rights groups to act as watchdogs and to use the PEFA Supplementary Framework on gender in their work. What also adaptations might be needed for it to be used more by civil society? Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. And good afternoon, everybody. And on behalf of the European Women's Lobby, I would really like to thank you for this invitation today. I think it's really good that to have such a number of different stakeholders together in one space talking about gender budgeting. Just briefly, I want to introduce in a few words the European Women's Lobby. It's the largest, the biggest women's coalition of women's NGOs, non-governmental organizations in the EU. It is a membership-based organization, meaning that it has members in the 27 EU member states, 3 accession countries, which include Serbia, Macedonia, Turkey, and also in the United Kingdom, Iceland, and also 17 European-wide organizations. So in total, we bring together over 2,000 women's organizations throughout Europe. So we call for a feminist Europe, which means a holistic approach. So obviously within that framework, public finances and budgets are crucial to achieving gender equality and to moving towards a feminist Europe, because after all, money is power. So I think, first of all, it's always good to kind of step back and to remind ourselves why gender budgeting, gender responsive budgeting, we call it what we wish, but at the end of the day, it's absolutely crucial, and crucial for a number of reasons. Firstly, there is no country in Europe, or in the world for that matter, where gender equality exists. And that's quite a daunting fact at the beginning of 2022. Secondly, then, the Gender Equality Index, which is produced by the European Institute of Gender Equality on an annual basis, measures equality in different areas of life, including money. And it shows that on a scale, in 2021, on a scale of 100, which is equality, the EU stands on average at 66 points, which means that it's only been an increase of a mere 1% in a year. And if we look at the period of a decade, say the last 10 years, we're only talking about an increase of about 5%. And what it really tells us is that the pace is very slow. And if we continue at that pace, it will take 60 years to achieve gender equality. Now, I have no doubt that everybody sitting on this webinar today and sitting around the screen want to see full gender equality in our lifetime. And therefore, we cannot wait. There is an urgency to move ahead. So budgets mirror political priorities, and they probably are the most powerful tool to bring about transformative change. And while at the European Women's Lobby, we do not focus specifically on the public expenditure and financial accountability framework, we do nevertheless really welcome the supplementary framework for assessing gender responsive financial management and its 9 indicators. It's really important to have international standards too, because in a way, I suppose it doesn't matter what the framework is. What does matter is that it actually translates into transformative change. And I think the more data we have, it was raised that we're missing data, we don't have enough. So the more data we have and the more tools that can actually pool together data, the better for everybody. So it's the role of women's non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations, we use both terms, is to put really pressure. The word advocacy was mentioned, but I would say even it's more than advocacy, it's really pressure on policymakers, because at the end of the day, it's not within the power of CSOs, women's organizations, to actually implement gender budgeting per se, but our role is more to provide the evidence, to also monitor and to question and show that it not only makes economic sense, but that it is in the interest of society as a whole. Because an equal distribution of public resources is smart spending. So I'm adding another motto. Smart spending, and in Lighthouse, the tools we have provide a lighthouse to guide us towards closing the gaps in income, resources, services, taxation. And I think one issue as well is really important. It also guarantees overall social cohesion. So it has massive gains. Now, as we are gradually emerging from an unprecedented global public health pandemic, that pandemic really brought to the forefront and made visible women's role in upholding society, the backbone of society, but it also showed kind of the raw edge of the reality of women's lives and the persistent and massive inequalities between women and men right across the globe, not only in Europe. So throughout the world, what we saw were women were at what we call the front line, providing care in professional and household settings. And the amount of unpaid care work increased substantially for them as schools and creches were in lockdown. And this in turn actually impacted on women's economic independence and showed that we really need massive investments in the care economy, including infrastructure, services, working conditions, pay, both for women and men, and that care is a sustainable economic model moving forward. Now, if we had had a systematic gender responsive budgeting analysis in terms of impact assessments, for example, to recovery plans, it would have become really blatantly obvious that the care economy was certainly something we should be investing in. Another issue on violence against women. What we saw was an increase, a dramatic increase, to the extent that the UN Secretary General called it a shadow pandemic, as women were trapped with their perpetrators. Again, service provision, shelters, etc., were really under-resourced, underfunded, and many CSOs had to struggle to respond to the distress of women and girls and children at that time. Now, again, if there had been a systematic, and if there is a systematic budgeting, gender budgeting approach, we could see that funding needs to be redirected to those services. And I'm not, denying the fact that some countries did provide punctual resources and increase the resources, but the question is for how long? Because this is a long-standing issue. For the moment, we are faced with galloping energy prices, which will impact disproportionately on low-income women and also women who form the majority of single-parent households. Again, we need a gender budgeting analysis to make this not only visible, but to be able to target responses to prevent women in these situations from the downward spiral of poverty. So these are just some of the examples of how gender budgeting is really an effective and tool and, as I say, smart spending. So coming back to the role of CSOs, at the European Women Lobby, we have just finished a 3-year project which we called Channeling Resources for Women's Rights. And one aspect was on gender budgeting. So what we did was we had put in place an expert group. We provided capacity building workshops to our members, to members of the European Parliament when they were elected back in 2019, and to the philanthropic community as well. We also developed a toolkit, which I'm going to show you here, and also developed a dedicated website. And the toolkit is available on the dedicated website, which I really want to stress, is a living tool, a living instrument, and we really welcome you to visit it, but also to provide some resources as well, so that it can be a sharing platform as well. Because the more that we work together, the stronger we will be in terms of ensuring that gender budgeting actually takes place. So I think one of the lessons that we learned from our 3-year project was that there are many initiatives going on in different places and in different spaces, particularly at local level as well. But what we really saw is that there's still a gap. They're still very much out there, kind of secondary. They haven't really been brought into the mainstream yet. And for example, during the negotiations for the EU's long-term budget, 7-year budget, called the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, and the subsequent package of financial measures, Recovery and Resilience Facility, Next Generation EU, etc., we were able to influence an increase in the budget allocated, for example, to the program on citizens' rights and values, and also to have a reference to a stronger dimension in the guidelines that the European Commission sent to member states to help them in terms of developing their own national recovery and resilience plans, to be able to avail as well of the funds available through that. And while that was a very positive step, nevertheless, we see that there's no specific targeted investments in the national recovery plans. So, and nor were there really any robust gender budgeting recommendations. There was more a description of the situation of women, which is already one step of making women more visible. So I would say for us, we see that in all frameworks, gender budgeting is not mainstreamed systematically. It is still considered as a separate exercise. It's disjointed from the real budget. So it's not getting into real national budgets. It's still seen to be an experiment. And we've been experimenting for many, many years now. So the budget, the part of the PEFA, the partners involved in that as well, actually have access to finance ministers right across the whole of the partnership countries. And really, they're in a very privileged position as well in terms of making sure that gender budgeting doesn't remain on the outside. And we know that gender budgeting, gender responsive budgeting, it's a long-term commitment. And I think we've seen in the, in the examples that were given, a very long term, but it requires strong leadership. And we can see the difference that women's leadership makes, because, for example, we have two real strong women leaders, the European Commission President and the President as well of the European Central Bank, who was the former director of the IMF. So we have women really in those positions for the moment. And while we as CSOs count on their leadership, we also want to give them the message that they can count on us, that we are on their side and by their side. So finally, I would just like to end really with a quote from the European Court of Auditors, because we should never underestimate either the role of auditing. We talked about monitoring, and auditing is really important as well. So they have their report in 2021 on gender mainstreaming in the EU budget. And they say very clearly that gender mainstreaming, because gender budgeting is a tool of gender mainstreaming, they say it's a simple idea. It means equality between women and men that needs to be promoted actively at all stages of policy making and implementation, including in areas that may seem unrelated. And the title of their report was, "It's time to turn words into actions." So I think we have many tools, and what we now need is more action. And we've no doubt whatsoever that the supplementary framework, I heard it called PEFA Gender, will contribute to making this happen. We need to join the dots, and we need to bring the gender budgeting from the outskirts right into the center. And we're pleased to see that the European Commission is beginning to look at gender budgeting within the budgetary process. And for our aim in the European Women's Lobby is that for the next MFF, because as I say, long term, the next MFF, which is the multi-annual financial framework in 2028, that there will be regulations and a robust framework that will make gender budgeting for once and for all a central part of all budgeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mary, for this very inspirational speech. I don't really know if I can summarize. I just feel empowered to go forth and to start not just advocating, but pressuring our governments to take the steps that they need to take to make these types of transformative changes. We have seen in our region also, and many of us in the network have done analyses on COVID-19, looking at public finance management and our government's responses to the crisis in the early days. And we could share that as a follow-up as well, but we have also seen that there was a slow response, and we've seen very personally the importance of paying more attention to the care economy, to domestic violence, and to other key issues that didn't come into existence with COVID-19. They pre-existed and were serious issues that resulted from the consistent lack of attention to and appropriate government financing in these areas. So yes, systematic gender budgeting will lead to more transformative change, to more equality, towards a more feminist Europe. Thank you for your words and inspiration. Now we get to turn to the Q&A. And so I welcome anyone who has questions to either raise your hand by using the reactions button at the bottom of the screen and clicking raise hand like I have just done. If you'd like to speak, I will try to pick people up as quickly as I see you raising your hands. Or if you would like to write in the chat, you may also do so. I see we already have one question coming from 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗿𝗁𝗁𝗁. And anyone who is listening in English, make sure your English is turned on so that you can hear the translation. 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗿𝗁𝗁, please, mirëserdhjet.
Përshëndetje për të gjithë, s'pari kisha dashur të falenderoj Rjetin që na mundësoi do të themi qasjen e këtij takimi ku me të vërtet neve na është nevojit ndoshta edhe më parë, po na nevojitet më tepër për ta futur në funksion në të ardhmen. Unë e kisha dashur ta bëj një pyetje kur e parashet FMN-ja, do me thonë implementimin e projektit PEFA-s në Kosovë.
So maybe we can turn this question over to Tia, and I would couple it with an additional question. In which other countries in the Western Balkans and or Moldova do you know right now there is a plan to do the PEFA analysis? And maybe we can hear from you, or I guess we can take a couple other questions first and then do a round for each of the speakers to respond. So I see we have here also 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗿𝗁𝗁𝗁. Please, Halil, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you very much. I have some comments and also I have some questions regardless to you and your team, I mean, including the speakers. But those questions, because if you allowed me, I would switch into Albanian.
Ju lutem.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Desha të pyes sa I përket të çështjes së buxhetimit gjinor, këtu pat edhe pjesë të çështjeve sociale. Do doja të di çfarë mekanizmat konkret që do të mund të të inkorporoheshin në ligjet buxhetore për shembull sa i përket shëndetit riprodhues. Për shkak se kemi raste kur një femër ose një grua e cila është e emancipuar, por e ka të pamundshme të jetë të jetë e dobishme në familjen e saj, rrjedhimisht të jetë në njëjtën kohë e dobishme edhe në vendin e saj të punës. Qysh do të mundemi me adresu këto çështje në mënyrë që të paktën pushimi i lehonisë ndoshta ose adresimi i çështjeve të nevojave të veçanta, për shembull pajisjeve që janë për personat me aftësi të kufizuara, e rrjedhimisht.
𝗕𝗂𝗄𝗵𝗱𝗲𝗿. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
How
much.
exactly do we apply gender budgeting to address these really difficult issues in our countries, like maternity leave, like the needs of persons with disabilities? How exactly do we apply it? So I'll leave that one on the floor for our speakers when we come back to you if you have concrete ideas on how it can be done. We know we have the PEFA framework, which gives us some guidelines, but how you want to elaborate it on the service provision, that would be great. I want to take now a question also from Liliana Jonoski.
Good afternoon, or maybe good evening to everyone. It was really a pleasure to be a part of this webinar today. My name is Liliana Jonoski. I'm Executive Director of Rural Coalition. It's an organization that is active in the part of agriculture and rural development, and especially also in the part of gender equality in rural areas. We are also a member of Gender Budget Watchdog Network, and it is a real pleasure to work with all of us, especially with all of you, and especially in the part of monitoring gender budgeting. And because we are an organization that is active in rural areas and in local level, my question is related to if this framework is possible to be implemented in local self-governments. And if there isn't, because in the presentation you mentioned that is a real challenge, how this framework could be also transferred to local governments, but for us it's very important also to improve these processes of gender equality, especially in local level, where the situation is still on a basic level, especially when we are talking about gender budgeting processes. So for us it's very important to know if this tool or what are the methods that we should use in order to this framework to be useful also and for local government, because I see in this process we as civil society organizations, I see our role as presenters, but also and the stakeholders which will take this role to present, but also to introduce this tool and to work along with the local, but also national authorities in its implementation. So it's very important how is the better way to implement and to introduce this tool, especially in local level. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now let's hear from Gordana Nestrovska.
Hello, my name is Gordana Nestorovska. I'm from Association for Social Innovations and Sustainable Development, RADAR. We're also part of the network in Macedonia. So I'm familiar, a few years ago, I was part of the project for local democracy, and they introduced PEFA indicators at local level in Macedonia. And they were using, they choose some of the indicators. So I know that there are 31 indicators in this PEFA methodology. Now you're mentioning only 9 indicators. So what was the criteria for selection of those 9 indicators? Can we gender the other indicators as well, or what are the, if we can, I don't know, adjust some of other indicators to local, especially for local level, as Lila mentioned, not only on national level.
Thank you so much. So I think this would be a great time to go back to our panelists and see if they would like to come in on these questions. How exactly can the PEFA gender methodology be applied, especially at the local level? And maybe a bit more elaboration on the number of indicators. Would any of you like to volunteer to come in first?
I can, Nicole, I can come in just briefly.
Yes, please. Thanks, Tia.
Thank you so much for all these questions. And again, really excited to have this conversation. So just maybe starting from the indicators and just sort of explaining a bit more where the PEFA gender fits in. As Nicole was already saying, that of course we have the core PEFA framework that has 31 indicators. And we also, you can use the PEFA framework both at the national level, and then you can use also at the local level. And for the local level, we have specific guidance where you can think about different ways how you can adjust the national level core framework to the local level. So where the PEFA gender then comes in, as I said, it has been designed to complement the main PEFA framework. So as we discussed, and as also Mary also pointed out, we think it's really important that the PEFA gender, when you think about doing it, you do it in the context of a broader BFM work, and that you would use the core PEFA framework and the gender framework together at the same time. It's also easier because it means that you do the work once, if you like. So that's why the main PEFA framework has more indicators than the PEFA gender framework, because they're supposed to complement each other. And the other reason why PEFA gender has fewer indicators is that what we've done is that we picked those indicators and dimensions that we see have had the most impact on gender equality, right? So we have tried to see, based on evidence and experience of the world, what are the aspects that matter. But for example, procurement is a good example, which we think is absolutely critical. But unfortunately, we could not include the framework because during the design and piloting phase, we realized that there isn't just enough evidence around the world what good practice looks like. So it's really unfortunate, because it means that we need to really focus on procurement, but we didn't feel fair to put it in the framework where we just didn't realize that there is not enough evidence to base it on, and then score countries they're based on now. Because as we pointed out, many countries still do struggle and have a lot of work to do. So if we put more and more stuff in there that we don't have good evidence of good practice, it's not really fair. So that's one example which is not included in the framework that we definitely will work on while we engage with partners, and hopefully get more evidence to include in some point in the future when we can. So that's the kind of explaining why the indicators look different, but look a bit different. That question on that. In terms of then the local level, yes, as I said, PEFA framework can be used at the local level, and we have specific guidance for that. Similarly, you can use PEFA gender at the local level. Now, so far, we have only a couple of examples where it has been used at the local level. For example, there is, I think there's a Brussels region that used, for example, at the local level, so you can. And obviously there are specific aspects that you want to think about based on the guidance, similar to the guidance we have for the core framework, that where things might be a bit different, and it might be that national level frameworks and local level frameworks, as we all pointed out, can have different aspects and challenges. So if you want to use that, please get in touch and we can certainly help you to think about how to do that effectively. But it's certainly possible. And perhaps, and this is me talking aloud, perhaps again in the future, we can think about, is there needs for specific guidance on that? So if there's specific issues, again, feedback from everybody, much welcome, so that we can think about and put that in our future work program. Then there was a question, I think, at the beginning about if there's going to be PEFA gender in Kosovo. Just to say is that, as I said at the beginning, we in the PEFA Secretariat don't necessarily know where PEFA assessments are done, because they are not ours. Each government decides whether they will do one, but also whether they will make them public. And different governments may work with different development partners like IMF, like World Bank, like CEDA, NORAD, others to implement those. And only if that government or the development partner want our help, or they want to get PEFA check, which is our kind of quality assurance endorsement for the report, then we know about it and then we publish on our website if the government wants to. So that means that there might be a lot of assessments going on or discussions going on that we don't necessarily know about. So just to say that obviously we talk to our partners and they might say we're planning this or we're discussions this, which we may know. But as I said, there has been a few assessments, and I know aware that also in your region there are discussions around PEFA gender assessments. I think your region happened to be particularly active on this, which is fantastic. So there are, if I'm aware, a few plans if they might materialize in the region. But as I said, obviously we have actually, if I understand correct, there is actually a plan or draft of Kosovo assessment ongoing. I may be wrong, but this is actually, I think, is happening. So I hope that it will happen and it will be public. So keep an eye on that. I also aware different countries are discussing, thinking about it, but it doesn't mean that it necessarily happen. We have talked about Ukraine. We have also Ukraine assessments at the sub-national level. I know that different partners are interested, for example, Moldova. I know that there's some discussions around these issues, whether it's necessarily PEFA gender around Albania, Georgia, different countries. So again, this is just my understanding, so we will need to see. But yeah, there's certainly interest. So it's a particularly good place to engage. I think I'll leave it there and leave other panelists to come in, but hopefully that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tia. And I see that Maja would like to come in, and Mary as well. So let's let you both come in. And Ludmila, I do see you. I'm sure you have a question about Moldova, but we'll get right back to you after the panelists come in.
Just maybe very briefly, because I think Tia answered the most relevant questions or all the questions, but I think it is indeed in also the hands of the civil society organizations to connect and to lobby for having the PEFA gender assessment done. And I think, as Tia said, one way to do it is through the existing projects and through the existing initiatives in which sometimes there are government counterparts involved, especially from gender mechanisms, who would be a very good to talk like a counterpart. But it's also, so I think, but the other way, as Tia also said, is that you can also do PEFA gender assessment. I mean, you can do that because there is only 9 indicators, as I think Gordana, or so it's not the full-fledged PEFA with these 30 indicators and all these sub-dimensions, etc., etc. And for you working with gender budgeting for so many years, it can be actually, I wouldn't say easy exercise, but easier exercise. So these are just my 2 points. And then just to mention that Claire was writing in a chat about what does it really mean. We are talking about gender perspective and gender analysis of the budgets, and what does that mean? And I don't think we can really answer that question fast, but I do know that there are so many good materials out there specifying what do we really mean when we talk about gender analysis of the budgets. I myself can share some, but I'm sure that that the network has a lot on that. So just wanted to make that note. Thank you.
Thank you, Maja. And I would share that, yes, the European Commission is funding GIZ to do the PEFA gender analysis here in Kosovo. It's expected to be coming out later this year. I do know that for a fact. I pass it over to Mary.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those very interesting questions and for those very specific questions about how do you do it. And I think that what I'd like to say is one of the biggest advantages of gender budgeting is that you have to look at the whole picture. And there's this assumption that budgets are neutral, and they're not. That the general interest is everybody's interest, which is not the case. So once you have a commitment to actually bringing in gender responsive budgeting, you're actually going to be putting everything flat, and you're looking to see who benefits at the end of the day. And it's not just women, men, it's which women. Are we responding to reproductive health, as somebody mentioned earlier on? Are we investing in hospitals, in services, in reproductive and sexual services as well? For example, persons with disabilities, who's benefiting at the end of the day? So you actually have to put everything flat, and that's one of the biggest advantages. What's crucial then is impact assessment. So when you have spending priorities, who's going to benefit and what is the impact? If we invest, for example, in building a bridge, for example, it's the likelihood of more men in the construction industry will benefit from, say, women who are working in different areas or have different needs as well. So that's one of the biggest advantages. And the crucial element is data. That is something that is really missing, but it also helps to identify what are the missing data and where do we need to go and find them. So I just wanted to also say that linking it to international commitments as well. Your countries have signed up to CEDAW, for example, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. There are 4 yearly reports that your governments have to submit to the CEDAW committee. In some countries, not all countries, but in many countries, women's organizations actually develop or draft what they call shadow reports. So they also submit them to the committee. So the committee gets like two sides of the story, so to speak, from the civil society perspective, from the governmental perspective. And it's a very effective tool, because if there are issues like budgeting that really you need to raise and you want to raise, that is a very good mechanism to do it as well, because any question that goes to the committee actually is sent back to the government for a response. I also just wanted to say that in Albania, because I believe somebody from Albania came in, the European Institute for Gender Equality has also developed the index for Albania. Although Albania is not part of the EU, they have done the index there. So I would really advise you to get in touch and to get some information from them as well regarding the index. And also to say that our website that I spoke about and the toolkit that I have here contains a lot of tips and a lot of practical proposals about how to actually engage, and from the perspective of NGOs as well. And also to say that we have in this toolkit a model advocacy letter as well. And we also have examples, and certainly from our members in Portugal, who have worked a lot with the Ministry for Health, for example, on the issues of reproductive health and care. And also our Swedish member, Swedish Women's Lobby, they have also produced a very practical tool that calls Follow the Money. So there are lots of tools out there. And that's why we need to build a kind of a critical mass of civil society as well, so that we can help each other out and share our tools, our experiences, and really push together so that we can make this happen at every level, whether it's local, regional, national, whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Indeed, advocacy coalitions are so important for pushing things forward. We only have about 10 minutes left, and I want to leave at the end a couple minutes for each of the speakers. So I think we could do a very quick round of questions if you keep your questions to less than a minute. So I know 𝗲𝗲𝗻𝗂 was next. 𝗲𝗲𝗻𝗂?
Hello, everyone. My name is 𝗲𝗲𝗻𝗂. I'm from Keystone, Moldova, which is a partner of Gender Budget Watchdog Network. And Marie already answered my questions because I wanted to share the last year, the World Bank conducted the PEFA assessment at country level, and the UN Women applied PEFA gender for the first time. The report is not public yet because the assessment is not finished. But my question was, and I can guess what scores Moldova will get on this assessment. What can civil society organizations do to speed up the implementation of GRB at national and also at the local level, because we are behind of our partners from Balkans, and Marie already gave a huge perspective on different tools and measures to be implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, 𝗲𝗻𝗂, and thank you for writing and sharing in the chat. We'll also try to collect some of these fantastic resources
Nicole,
that have been shared with us today so that we can
really
share them with
hear
you
you.
in a follow-up email. I don't know if I'm allowed as moderator, but as I don't see any hands, I'd like to shoot a couple of really quick questions, if it's possible to answer quickly, to our panelists. One, I'm just curious to hear from Tia, and I think Maja, maybe you were involved regarding the development of PEFA gender framework. How was it combined or compared with SDG 5C1? There's a bit of overlap in the two indicator frameworks, but they're not the same. They're different. And if you could speak to that, we would be really interested, because we're like, should we use both? What should we do? So that would be really interesting. And Mary, I'd really like to hear about European Women's Lobby. If you have looked at all into building some advocacy efforts on the EU's financing, and maybe this is also a bit of a question for Tia. Can we use PEFA gender framework for multilaterals? Can we use it to look at EU financing? Is it being used, or has anyone thought about using PEFA gender with the EU? And linked to that, we know Gender Action Plan 3 is out. We're very happy that GRB is in there in terms of governments adopting it, but it's looking outside the EU. It's not really looking at the EU's own external financing and action documents, and how is the EU committing to do gender budgeting in the projects it funds in its external relations. Is European Women's Lobby doing any work on this? And maybe we can form some broader coalitions for partnerships and advocacy. So maybe I leave now each of the panelists to give a 2-minute little response and or summary to close up for the day. Does anyone want to go first? I see Mary. Yeah, please, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, very absolutely essential questions. And I think that, yes, we are working on the EU budget. And as I said, in the multi-annual financial framework, so it's a 7-year budget, but nevertheless, there is also an annual budget as well. The MFF is the 7-year framework, if you like. Obviously, there are annual budgets as well. And yes, we are closely monitoring those, and we'll be engaging. I think we're very, very happy that the European Court of Auditors has come out with its report with 6 very targeted recommendations to the EU and to the different institutions about really bringing gender mainstreaming into as part of gender budgeting, as part of gender mainstreaming, which is really, really good. And they are following up on those recommendations, and we are supporting them in every way we will, and we'll continue to really engage with them there. So in terms of, yes, it's all of the EU budget, whether it's about the the common agricultural policy, to transport policy, to external funding, etc. That is one of the key issues, is that it really has to be applied right across the board. But I do have one question for you. I'm going to throw you back a question, not just for you, but for everybody. I think the issue is when you're dealing with performance-based budgets, what is the scope for introducing gender budgeting? Because performance-based budgets mean that we want results. We want tangible, visible results within, say, if we come back to the EU budget, within a 7-year period. And I think that is a question that we need to really work through and find ways in which that can be done. And that comes back, I suppose, to the indicators and how do you monitor progress? How do you monitor success? What milestones do you have to put in place so that you know you're on the journey and that the journey won't stop 7 years later because it's a change and the performance budgets have different expectations for results in that. And also we'd be very, very happy to collaborate. I think, again, it's an international community we need to build. There is no gender equality, doesn't exist anywhere in the world. So it's within all of our interests to make sure it does. And it's only by working together. So we'll be very happy to work with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Maja?
Yes, I'm sorry. I obviously moved my office in the kitchen space. So now you are also seeing my sons taking the food. In any case, I'm sorry. I don't mean to make a discussion less professional by acknowledging this fact. Just to say two things very fast. The first one is first to agree with Mary, and performance budgeting and gender budgeting have been the passion of mine because we were working on introduction of performance budgeting in Bosnia. And one phase of the project did not have gender budgeting, and then the second phase had gender budgeting, and then we had to lobby and we had to do everything all over again. And instead, if we were working on performance budgeting and saying, and very important analytical dimension that we want to see in the indicators is also gender equality, and it would have been so much easier. So I do agree with you on that. And just to say on indicator SDG 5C1, I really was fortunate to be part of that working group, and then also the group that was working on the PEFA gender framework. And I do need to say that these are obviously two worlds, even though working with the same concept. So SDG 5C1, just very in a nutshell to say, is I think very constrained by the definition that it's tracking the funding for gender equality. So how it evolves, the indicator, it's constrained within kind of that framework. And I wouldn't, of course, it's very important to be measured. And I would like to see more countries using it, especially countries that are working on gender budgeting. This is actually not happening. And I don't know of the Balkan countries and countries present here, who of you, at least that you are aware, is reporting against 5C1, but it would certainly be important. And it's also another level of advocacy in a sense. We were trying to influence that in Ukraine as well. So yes, I would stop here, but Nicole, I think because I will not have any more seconds to say anything else, I just want to thank you again. I really want to make myself available. I think Maria already knows, but I am available to share any materials or anything that I can, and actually very personally interested in also assisting my home countries. So with that, thank you on my own behalf. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maja, for your support. Tia, would you like to come in for a few last words?
Sure. Thank you so much. I'll be brief just to say, of course, there is a link between PEFA gender and the SDG 5C.1. And we have actually been talking with UN Women to see how we can make sure that our efforts are consistent, and we can, from each side, sort of support the other so that we can all together sort of drive towards the same goal. They are obviously a bit different and a bit at different levels, but we think that they can be really complementary. So watch this space. Interesting idea, Nicole, about using PEFA gender for multilaterals. I never have thought about it. Why not? Please, somebody take ahead and try that. But just to say that EU is one of our funders in PEFA, and they're super supportive of PEFA gender, and they are funding a lot of PEFA gender assessments around the world, which is fantastic. And they're very sort of big supporter for us. And then finally, just to say, there's a comment from Claire in the chat that I think is really important. Absolutely, we are talking a lot of times about gender perspective in BFM and budgeting in quite abstract terms, and I think yes, you can use PEFA gender to look at what it looks like across the budget cycle, but I do agree that we need to start talking about it a bit more concretely. As I said in my presentation, we've noticed that there's also an issue that we need to make it sort of more practical to people. And Mary also already gave some good examples what it could look like and not look like, but agree, I think we should all try to do more of that and have those conversations, so what it means. So thank you so much. It's been fascinating. I really look forward to following up with you all and collaborating with you all. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. So I guess we're a couple minutes over time, so we'd better wrap it up. I don't think I can summarize everything discussed, but in brief, budgets aren't gender neutral. Gender budgeting is better budgeting. We shouldn't just advocate, but we should pressure our governments to use the PEFA framework to diagnose the problems and then advocate for the recommendations. And building advocacy coalitions together to do this can make us stronger. So special thanks to all of our speakers today. Thank you to Tia, to Mary, to Maja for your great thoughts and ideas, very thought-provoking and inspiring. A special thanks also to all of our partners in the network who are playing different roles in promoting and organizing this event. Thank you to Austrian Development Agency, Swedish International Development Agency for your ongoing support, and taxpayers in those countries. We really appreciate it. And also thanks to our translators. Not last but least, I know I talk too fast. I'm talking too fast again now. I hope you can all take a deep breath when we turn this to a close. We will be sharing the report with all of you, and we look forward to future collaboration. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.